All right, hello and welcome everybody back to the Game Dev Show here with Yorai and Jason. We've just been chatting and having some fun, discussing a couple of the fun things that we want to talk about today and getting ready to say hello. So if you're out here with us live, please hit the thumbs up button and say hello in chat. And like to see who's here and what all you guys would like to talk about. But we've got a couple of different topics that we were going to discuss. Yorai actually has some cool technical stuff, and I've got some random boring shit that I wanted to talk about too. So welcome everybody. You guys both welcome to say hello or whatever you want to say.
Hi.
Howdy.
Fair enough. So I guess I'm not even sure which topic we should get started on. I mean, we talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about. You guys have a preference on where we start today?
Well, first off, Thanksgiving just went by, and now we have Black Friday sales. So if you haven't checked all the Black Friday sales, you should really go and do that. Some of them decide to end today, some will last another week, but your mileage may vary depending on what you need. There's a ton of sales this year, I noticed, especially from other sites that have like courses or textures or concept outs for characters. Everything is on sale.
Yeah, that's very true. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting texts like all morning from random companies about their sales. I think I've gotten 4 from Pillow Cube and I don't know, like 5 different companies that are all texting me about their sales. Jelly Belly's actually ordered some this morning. But yeah, there's definitely a ton of stuff on sale. And I linked the Asset Store Black Friday sale stuff that's on sale too. There's a link down there, and I think the code's in the description for the extra 10% off. But what about you?
It's funny when you get an email from a company that you haven't actually bought anything from in like a year and a half. All of a sudden, they're just sending you random emails, and it's like, oh, I forgot I was even on a mailing list with whoever these people are. Yeah, I've been relatively good, but only because literally today I had my end of day wrap up with my accountant about 4 hours ago. So getting my end of year tax bill has been a nice sobering reminder that I probably shouldn't be going too hard on the end of year sales. There's still a few things I kind of want to get. I usually buy courses this time of year because there tends to be a lot of these bundling courses that are like learn to be a better writer or sound designer or programmer or something. And I tend to buy all of them because knowledge is the one thing that will always, even if the course isn't great, at the end of the day, it's still stuff that supports you and you find valuable. So usually if you can get it 50% off, it's well worth it. So I tend to buy a lot of courses around this time of year, but I might not this year. I might be a little bit more cautious financially, so we'll see.
Have you actually finished all the courses that you've bought?
Oh God, no. I finished probably about 60% of them. But I do have a lot of them like sitting on my desk at top as if like there's things to actually right now I have the Learning to Learn course, which I picked up a while back, which is I'm actually going through right now. I'm currently looking at a Pluralsight course on there's some new changes to .NET. There's a new release on their one, so I still do them. It's just the problem is there's always something new and shiny, right?
Yeah, there's always a ton of stuff out there to learn too. That's interesting. I usually do the same. I'll grab courses and service things like products that I use that have a lot of the time they'll have like an annual plan, like the thumbnail generator tool that I use. Like they just had a 70% off deal today. So I get things like that, a lot of those tools, and then random tech stuff, which I try to resist the urge to buy that, and kids' toys, of course, like tons and tons of Legos and toys that I probably didn't need to get, but lots of tech stuff as well. I've grabbed, I don't know, 5 or 6 different things in the last week. I found a chair for $100, like a massage chair from Best Buy for $100, a Pac-Man arcade 1-up setup that I wanted to check out and see how it is and just do a little video about. That was on sale for I think it was like 150. There are a bunch of just random little tech stuff that keeps popping up. I saw this monitor, 49-inch monitor was up for $600. I almost got that, but then I was like, I really don't need another 49-inch monitor. So I gotta resist the urge too. Just like like I don't necessarily need it unless it's something super cool. I'm trying to avoid grabbing them. I did put my courses up for sale though. I forgot about that. I put a Black Friday sale up. You can probably find the link down in the description if I remember to put it there. I totally forgot to mention that.
Do you still have the merch as well? The various like hoodies and things. I only say that because again, completely genuinely just coincidence. I'm currently rocking the
Yeah,
Dev hoodie.
that's the one.
Yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
Unironically, like I say this to be completely genuinely straightforward. I don't normally, at least I never did wear hoodies. I was always a shirt guy, and so I don't have a lot of things which are jackets or hoodies. It's just I tend to wear like work shirts at my desk at work. But it's been really cold, and I was really I was really bummed out. And when I was kind of going for my walks, I was wearing various, jackets and hoodies, and I was like, I actually just had this in the office, and I wear it probably every 2 to 3 days now. Or well, I have I think I have two of them. I have this and the black one. So, but I switched between. It's like they're really handy. They're really straightforward, and they're actually very comfy. So, hashtag not sponsored, but just generally, I do actually like hoodies.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to send you some more hoodies. I love them. They're just like, I get cold all the time and just toss on a hoodie, and then second I get warm, I throw it to the floor and find another one, and my wife gets mad.
And just to show that I am being completely fair here, I also got one of the notepads. Notepad sucks. Hate the notepad.
I'm much less of a fan of the notepad myself too. I'd really like to do a like a full-on game dev notebook that's actually got useful information in it and kind of more like the right size and lined paper and like more useful setup than not just a generic notebook. But I really suck at design stuff. So
well, my problem is being left-handed. Anytime it's a left spiraled thing, and specifically that one's got a very large spiral, and so it actively like curves my hand a bit, so it's hard to write in. So I just got very annoyed and said I can't use this. I tried rotating it, so I was writing it the wrong way around, and I just couldn't. I have enough pads that open upwards that I just had to switch.
Yeah, I mostly use it like that too. I flip it over and I draw on there instead of writing. But
when I think about it, I haven't actually used a physical notepad in months. I moved entirely to using Obsidian and various sketches that I can paste on Milanote for references when I need things. I really
actually, small side note: if you're doing that, have you tried Escaladraw?
No.
So Escaladraw is a plugin. Well, it's actually a separate thing, but it's a plugin you can get in Obsidian that has a little draw window, and you can literally just like drag and drop, draw stuff, add images. It's kind of like Milanote Lite. And then you can embed those in other notes as like little charts and graphs. So that's what I use.
Okay, I'm gonna check that out as soon as we're done. So there is one thing that I wanted to bring up, which is when you buy courses, also remember that this is a great time to get subscriptions for all the services that became subscription-based, or buying licenses for things that are perpetual use. Specifically, all of the things like Substance, Houdini probably. There are other applications out there for content creation, obviously, depending on what you need, but they tend to be
I noticed Eagle was on
the
sale too. They were cheap, but it's still on sale, so that's another one to get.
Yeah, but depending on the license that you need, it's not always cheap. There are things that can escalate up to like $2,000, and the discount actually means a lot when you can get it.
I think Pluralsight's like that. Pluralsight right now has a discount thing. Again, I'm on their legacy thing from long before they changed their pricing model, and out of spite, if I drop it, they'll force me onto the new model, and so I'm sticking with the old model, even when I don't use it much. But I think if someone's getting a new subscription, I think now is a pretty good time to do it.
Yeah. Another thing is, if you go and check out sales, I do recommend sorting by the highest discount. Apparently, most of the stores added that this year. It's not always there, and you should always try and press that button when it's there to avoid any problems. I luckily had a case where I wanted some assets, so I put them in my cart, and I actually forgot to buy them, and now they're on sale, so yay me.
That happened to me on something this morning. I looked at something last week, added it to cart, totally forgot to check it out, and then I saw it pop up on Slick Deals. I was like, oh, crap, gotta go finish ordering that, and saved a bunch.
Yeah. There is one thing I wanted to bring up earlier. Jason, you mentioned the new version of C# coming up and being usable these days. I do recommend everybody check out the latest features, because one of them actually became pretty relevant to me literally today. So I started making my first source generator project out of a decision to try and cut myself some headaches on a project with a friend, where basically we have a project and it reads a bunch of files wrong because it is outdated, specifically to some upgrades that happened to how assets are serialized and deserialized. And now we read everything wrong from bytes, and we literally can't use anything. So the friend managed to extract the whole type tree. And if you don't know what the type tree is, your project has managed types, and they serialize and deserialize in a certain way. So you can get all of the necessary types that can be serialized, and you can get what members are serialized and in what order. And you can extract all that information, and then you can see it, which is good if you want to start referencing them one by one. But referencing them one by one is torture, because there's over 200 types. And they all have like 10 to 20 fields in them. So we decided to try and make a source generator project that takes all that information and makes a new reader that can read everything based on classes generated from that deserialization bit. And in source generator projects, there is a problem where you call a class by the same name as something that already exists, and then you have a conflict. But they added file scope classes that you can just have them exist within a single file. And that's been really neat. In general, source generators, though, are really cool because you can extract anything you want. You don't even have to add things to the source. You can just literally make a file, say it was generated on this day, make some notes that are fun to have. And it made me think a lot about how you can actually start implementing source generators, because it's really easy, except for one caveat I bumped into. When you make a source generator project, it's basically an analyzer project. It analyzes your existing project, and it can do stuff. You're given context, you can do whatever you want with it. And if you want to know how to get started, there's actually a great tutorial on Microsoft's own site here. But basically speaking, it's literally just a simple project, like 6 lines of project CSproj file, and a reference in your main project to it. And then that's it, it works. Now, from that point, you can make like a source generator implementing class and have a generator attribute, and you're basically done. It runs, and you can do whatever you want with it in different steps. And this lets you cut down a lot of uptime costs if you want to use it, for example, as an improvement over reflection. So you know how we talked about ability systems that just find things by attributes in previous shows. You can do that at runtime, but it's going to be the same every time. So there is no point really, unless you load classes dynamically, which is a whole other topic, which almost nobody I know does, because it is a hassle. You can just find them in the source generator, generate classes for them, and that cuts down the startup time for your application. It doesn't matter for everybody, but in case you need to launch your application multiple times in small batches, this can cut down the cost in a cumulative matter. You can also generate more than just the classes. You can do a lot of like extra information about them and provide that to whoever needs it. It's something that's really neat. I found it pretty easy to work with. The one caveat I had was I needed to read the JSON file for the type tree. And source generator projects apparently run really early in the pipeline for the build, and they don't get access to some of the DLLs apparently. So I couldn't actually reference newtons of JSON. And that became a whole fiasco because it didn't tell me anything useful. It just said it didn't find the file. And I started looking it up, and nobody got me like good answers. And eventually I just found some comments saying that they don't get access to it, and a lot of people decide to just implement the light version of the libraries into the source generator project and just access that this way. So I found a light JSON library, I dropped it in, everything works like magic, and now I have like 600 lines of generated stuff to tell me that I'm doing everything wrong and I'm silly. But it's a huge improvement, and I really want to start integrating this to the rest of my workflow.
Nice. So what?
I've not done as much as you with those. The only thing I've really done is I use them a bit for automatically generating builder patterns in unit tests. So you get like nice syntactical, having to write all the fluent assertions with name, with description a million times over. A lot of it can just be auto-generated. So I used to use T4 template style approaches for that, but generators are better for some of this stuff. So I've played a little bit, but not nearly as much as you have.
To be fair, though, you can do the generate. Like, there is a separation of concerns here. You can just make your own generator, not a source generator. Just literally read the stuff, write a file, because in the end of the day, you're still just going to write strings into a text file and just either add it to the project through a source generator, or you can do it manually. So there isn't like some huge magic here. You're literally just getting some information, you're writing down strings, you put them in a file, done. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. It's not like some god system out there in the ether.
No, it seems pretty simple and straightforward too. A lot simpler than T4 templates that Story was just talking about. I think that's the last time I did code generation was with T4 templates, just auto-generating the base of stuff for data entry.
The one thing I did like is the T4 templates are basically automatic, as in they just happen as you make changes, which is quite nice. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say involved, but you have to actually like run and compile or do stuff separately with this. It has a lot more pros than that.
Yeah.
There's a question here. What Unity version is this for?
So I believe this is available since .NET Standard 2.0, and the Unity Dots project literally uses source generation to complete some efforts for you in a more efficient manner. I don't recall any recent project I used that had source generation, but weavers do exist. I think Mirror One used weavers to generate some stuff for you. When you add attributes over your networking methods, it would just generate things in the back.
I used to use Photon weavers back in the day. They were a very popular one for data attributions and stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of projects and assets out there on the store that just straight up want you to use weavers because they let you strongly type what you need and prevent like weak typing issues. You changed something in an asset and suddenly everything breaks. And you don't know because your string is still out there and it's like it's happy and doesn't care. So weavers are useful. I hate them with passion, but they are useful.
I use Photon all the time. It was helpful back in the day because it made it easy to fix and debug and solve a lot of problems and just add stuff in to everything was cool.
Especially with WPF, because WPF had a whole lot of code by convention code where you had to like automate so many things, and it's like be able to just put an attribute on a class and say, please just do all of the properties to look like this, please. It's so nice.
So this comment right here, I fell in love with .NET 7 from day one. Performance is fire, and new features are amazing. I just want to say I fully agree, and the new iterators are sweet. There is like so much happiness from just having your code instantly running faster, especially when you do a lot of primitive iterations. I want to try and upgrade some old projects I have, because I have something that literally runs like 20 million ints for something. And apparently they improved a lot how the base iteration speed works, especially if you use link and stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's not even like it's random edge case stuff. They're like improving link and how strings work. And it's like, okay, so everything with strings and with link is faster. Okay, that's everything I've ever written for the most part. So.
Yeah, and spans too. Like the spans are magic.
Can you tell me what the 20 million ints is? What possibly has that many? You just got my mind wondering, like, what the hell is it?
So it's going to be a bit difficult to explain, but bear with me. I hate cloth deformation. Let's start with that. When you have a character and you try to spin it, there are a lot of artifacts that can form, because you know how that works. You have skin weights, and each bone has like certain weights for the skin. And you can only have so many bones that you can bind to, and depending on how they rotate, you can't exactly always get an outcome that you want. So once upon a time, I decided to make a project that voxelizes a mesh, tries to fill it up, tries to figure out how to bind all the bones the best way possible, and also run animations and try to figure out the weights to them. It's not... there are tools that do that better these days. For example, Houdini has tools for it. I think Maya had tools for it. it is out there. I think there is even a Blender paid add-on on Blender Market that does that these days. But I tried to make my own version, and it worked really nice at the start. And then I tried it on a real model, and that real model took like 7 hours to bake, and there was like a tiny issue with it. So I just gave up and did that manually.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So Aaron Carter also says 20 million ints, terrain indices for one, compute workloads. He's not crazy.
Oh yeah, I was just trying to figure out what it was that I figure you must have something going on there. It's like, well, what the hell is it?
Yeah, so general baking projects, if you try to make anything in 3D space that has cells, it's going to be way too many. Yeah.
Yeah, this looks pretty cool. I'm going to have to play with the code generation stuff sometime soon. I just need to come up with a good use case for it. So I think if you guys think of something, let me know too. Be fun to do a video on, I think.
Yeah, so the main tasks that you have with source generation is literally just either you prepare something from one project for another project in a strong way, something that I haven't bumped into a lot, but for game content, I think this is like a really strong thing. You can, if you're careful, try to have source generators that check what item IDs you have in your project and then generate a localization file that you can drop to anyone to start localizing your game for you. There are, of course, the reduction of reflection usages, because reflection is at runtime. It does have a performance cost, even if you only do it once. If you want to get rid of that, you can use source generators to let them wire things up. This is especially useful if you're doing a lot of reflection. Of course, you lose the runtime benefits of doing things dynamically, but if you aren't doing things dynamically, this is better. And then there's like general Weaver stuff, but there's not much to say about them. They're literally find, make.
I've got a weird use case for it. I'm curious what you guys think of, because I've seen something similar to this done in the past, but where the code generation was essentially used to generate essentially generate each ability. So designers would use an external tool that would define what the ability does, and then it would generate actual code to run that. So it didn't generate directly. It wasn't in C#. This was an older project done in C++, going to another language. But it would essentially do that, where it would take the data and then generate the code out of the data that they'd put into there, so that it was essentially just to be faster, pretty much. So that each ability had its own code, and could then be customized afterwards, I guess, if they wanted to. So
yeah. Sounds like a perfectly valid use case to me. This is especially better because if you need to start binding everything manually by yourself, there's going to be a lot of issues you bump into. For example, if you just put a mine down, mine that can explode when things get near it, you could just use the onCollision end event. But now, if that mine wants to move, you need to add an update command. Now, you could just have the update command that keeps moving it, but not give it velocity, and then it stays in place. But you're paying the performance cost. Generating the classes lets you not pay the performance cost when you don't need it, because you don't implement the methods at all, and then you don't need to bind them, etc., etc. You could just do it as a separate component and then just have a stack of components, but you can have an object generator for that. The idea of separating what you want to make, the intention of what it should be, and how it's implemented is perfectly good and fine, and you shouldn't care what the output becomes. This also holds really strongly in case of projects that people aren't going to see the source of. When you make a game, people are not going to see all the messy code you have behind. I'm saying that as somebody who deals with a 70,000 lines main CS class.
Only 70,000 lines.
Don't worry, we have another 70,000 in the player, another 90,000 in WorldGen. I don't know. It never gets smaller, sadly. Yeah. So people aren't going to see this mess. And if you get extra performance out of having these generators making things for you, and you get the speed because the designers only convey their intent, more power to you.
Well, yeah. Like I said, I'll probably do a video on code generation sometime soon. Just because this talk has inspired me to. The only real reason, which is like why half the videos that I end up doing come about, just because talk to
To
somebody.
be fair, I do want to point out that a lot of projects that you're using, if you ever made a multiplayer game in Unity and you use one of the standard libraries, there are a ton of source generators out there, or at least source analyzers. If you use Photon, they actually make a map of all your RPCs, and they cut down the names that they have to send, the keys they have to send for this is that RPC between different clients. Because you, in the end of the day, you have to serialize some data, and a full method name is a lot of data. So they find the methods that you want.
Although my personal little rant about Photon, the way they do that is they do it across the project and they find all of the RPCs regardless, which means if you're like me and very stringent about deleting any unnecessary scripts, like the example files, which have RPCs defined in them, and the person you're working with doesn't, all of the indexes are wrong for all of the names of the RPC calls, and it doesn't work correctly because they've got a temporary file somewhere in the project, but there's nothing to do with the real project, which breaks all of your RPC calls. So that can happen sometimes.
Yeah. So this is one case where that does having less lines of code mean faster performance? No.
There's a question in chat. So it doesn't.
Yeah.
Less code is not faster performance.
Not necessarily. So it's nuanced. First off, it matters what the lines of code do, because a lot of the stuff that you call are actually short forms for something big that happens in the background. When you call spritebatch.draw this sprite in this angle, it may be one line of code, but if you go inside that method, there's like 100 that just try to make a mesh, try to figure out where it is, try to figure out the transform of where it is on the screen, try to figure out what orientation it has, what UVs it has to render.
You don't even need to go that abstract. You can just take a straightforward, is 1 equal 2? You could say, well, what does equal mean? Is it equals compare or equals value type? Is it object equality compare? Does it implement I equality compare of type thing? Like equals, if you just take the equals function and you just, go down one level into it, the default one is about 4 levels, I think 5. And then the one, if you include Unity, is up to like 8. 8 levels of nested function calls, which call other functions, which nest things, that do multiple comparisons against hash checks. And that's the symbol, never mind the whole set of code behind it. So the short answer is less work, but the question is what's less work? And code lines it's language. Doesn't matter which you can call a job by one name or by a sentence, but it's not the work that matters, not what you call it.
Yeah. They only convey the intent, not what actually happens. Now, having less lines of code in total only has one performance benefit, and that is you have less to build and you have less to load, which is a tiny improvement. But
less to read.
Yeah.
So that's the bigger improvement. You have less that you have to actually read yourself. As long as it's easier, it's still easy to understand. And I think I just wanted to point out one good example of the length of one line of code versus multiple lines of code. Just looking at like combining strings, right? If you do some string plus like name equals first name plus middle name plus last name, you're actually doing like 4 operations there and creating strings 4 times, where you could set up a string builder and combine that, or you could use the string interpolation that'll magically do that yourself too, if you know that. But the length of the code doesn't really matter. It's the amount of
a classic one. Classic one in Unity is vector multiplied by float. You're like, oh, that's just an operation. Well, no, because behind the scenes you are using an implicit operator, which is going to do a conversion and multiply each value by each value. That's fine. But if you then multiply vector by float, that'll be very different. Or vector by float by vector by float. So even just putting round brackets around the 2 floats will suddenly lose an entire operation you have to do on multiple sub-values. It starts to get into interesting territory. I would say, though, if you're new to the whole concept of performance in general, there's one almost universal truth, which is if you're talking about performance, it's a trade-off of one of 2 things pretty universally. It's either work done or the process or the amount of memory or processing you're using. So in general, you can take almost any operation and it'll either run longer, or you can cache the results in advance and then read the cached values. So depending on what you're doing, you can either look through a list manually. It's like having a box of stuff. You can look through a box and find the thing you want, Or you can pre-look through the box, sort them, organize it, put little tags on them, and then put a little box of tags on your desk that's much easier to sort through. The work is being done by having to store those little tags, have a reference, and that you've done all the work in advance. So it's almost always that. It's almost always a trade-off of how much can I get away with storing in memory to like pre-build this versus how much of this do I have to do live effectively? And everything else boils down from that. When you talk about lighting, that's what a light map is. We're talking about almost all bakes, maps, files, texture maps, atlases. They're all the same theory boiled down to one form or another, which is, do I either do it live or do I pre-do it and I check my results in post effectively?
Of course, there is the idea of optimizing simply by doing less work to figure out what you need, like not repeating work you've already done, or literally simplifying the actual calculations. When you want to calculate what is 2 times 100, you don't have to do 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. You can just do 2 multiply 100, and you'll get the result in one operation for the device.
And one is not necessarily better than the other two. It's worth noting that it may feel like that, but what's not intuitive at first is it may be conceptually faster to cache something, but in a world where you've got like multiple threads you could fire, it's faster to have 3 people doing a slow operation than 1 person doing a fast operation, right? If you can do it in parallel. So sometimes it makes sense to take a task, go through all the caching, make a cached version, but the cached version doesn't work with threads, so you uncache it, you split it up into multiple threads, and you have 4 or 5 threads doing it at once, and the end result is faster than the cached version. So, but it is usually that balance.
There is one more thing I want to say before we move on to the next topic, which is there is a cost to loading classes with a lot of content. So having less code in each class has a performance benefit for the first time you load that class. In Terraria, we had a very interesting case where the first time you ever fire a projectile or spawn an NPC in the game would freeze for a solid 2 to 3 seconds. And the reason was the class was loading. It wasn't referenced until that one point where it had to call a single method, and suddenly it had to load everything related to that code. And that was a very aggravating thing. These days, we have a piece of code that runs while the game is booting up, and it's loading all the classes in ahead of time. It's warming them up, and then we can just straight up enjoy not having this freeze as you play. And nobody gets to notice it, which is probably something to pay attention to. Always make the processes that people pay attention to happen in the time that they can pay attention to it.
And again, if you want to see this live, games, whenever you stand still for a second, the little save spinner in the corner, smart games actually don't do the spinner isn't when you enter a room. The spinner is when you take your hands off the controller and you put it down, and you'll notice the spinner starts once it notices you've been idle for a little while. A lot of games do that.
Yeah, and there's also transition screens between matches. Garbage allocate, just throw everything you have. Don't need the garbage allocation mid-play. This actually matters a lot in competitive games, because if you get a single freeze and that causes you death, you're going to rage quit. So, yeah.
I like how you're preloading those classes, though. It just reminded me of when I had to do that for API calls, just for the same exact reason, because if one of them didn't get called for a while, it would take sometimes more than 2 or 3 seconds to start up and respond on that call, and it would freeze up, and then I'd get some email with somebody complaining that something was slow because it took 5 seconds the first time. So they'd preload all that stuff.
But conversely, the opposite's true too, right? Like, you got to keep in mind that if you have a game and it's going to load the entire giant level in advance, the game looks like it freezes for 2 minutes while it loads. Sometimes it's better to not load the damn level till it loads in and then start stream loading in portions. It really depends.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. So Yorai, this was a link that you'd shared earlier, some new performance-related functionality. It seemed kind of on topic, so I figured to give you a chance to just talk about it real quick. You can tell everybody what it was?
Yeah, so recently Unity announced this new transform point and Gizmo line drawing APIs that are arriving in 2023.1. If you haven't used them before, in Unity, you work with transforms. Transforms tell you where your thing is, where it's looking at, and how big it is, with scale, rotation, and position. But there is the concept of parenting. And how parenting works is you can basically stack up positions, rotations, and scales relative to each other. And that gets into all matrix space calculations, but basically, if you have something tiny that's sitting on something big out there in space, and you just want something relatively 1 meter forward to that tiny thing that you have with a small scale, it's going to be a lot of calculations to figure out along the line of multiple parentings. For example, if you have the thing in the space, then it has a spine, that spine has a clavicle, and that clavicle has a shoulder, and your fly sits on the shoulder, and your fly wants to look forward. It's going to be a lot of calculations to figure out where it is. But Unity simplifies all that for you and has transform methods for transform point, transform direction, and transform vector. They're all relative to that transform. And you can bring things from world space to that transform space, or vice versa. And calling these operations is a bit slow, especially if you do them a lot. Now, there are multiple reasons why you'll want to do things a lot. For example, if you have a piece of a roller coaster that has a bunch of lines in its path, and you want to move that entire roller coaster's dynamic path, or rotate it, or scale it down, etc., and you need everything to be in world space for whatever reason, you're going to be transforming a lot of positions. But with this batch API, you can now optimize a lot of that process by making all the data you need in advance, throwing it all for processing at once, and then getting it all at once. And the performance benefits are huge. This is also reminiscent of the data-oriented design that Unity is pushing with dots. So it's great. And right now, if you make any heavy use of this, this is going to be huge for you. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, this was a new one to me, so it seems pretty interesting. You just passing it. The performance improvement seems obviously enormous right here.
Yeah. There is one thing I wanted to bring up about this, which is if you haven't used Transform Point or Advanced Transform Point yet, learn how to use them. They are extremely useful, especially in character controllers cases. All those games that have gravity that lets you start walking on walls and you have no idea how you start handling the inputs because that one tutorial in Unity told you to flatten the y-axis, all of that can work with just a single call here. Because you can do everything relative to character space. Those games that try to figure out with radians, the tutorials, sorry, they try to make you figure out where you're aiming at with radians. You don't need any of that. All you need is things relative to which thing is observing them. So, for example, you have transform direction, and what you can do is just have a right direction, and you don't care which space that right is in because you're going to give that to a character. So an enemy that tries to circle around you can move a transform direction relative to its right. And if you try to make it move in a certain direction in world space and you need to figure out what it is relative to that character, you can just inverse transform into that character's space. And now you know what kind of animation parameters you need to make it blend into walking sideways. Just really powerful stuff.
Need to find a good video to share on this to really explain. I feel like it's something that needs to be very visual to show. Like showing the text is kind of hard. But
yeah, ironically, I don't think I've seen a single YouTube tutorial that actually showcases this.
Yeah, I can't think of one offhand. So, All right. Well, Story, you had where was that link you just sent me?
Oh, just it seemed relevant, right? Because we're basically talking about performance as a concept, and SIMD basically is sort of purely from a homework. If anybody's interested in the topic, it's the general principle of, if you think about all of this stuff boils down to memory and storage and how things are lined up together. And in general, if you're trying to do operations, doing operations on stuff that is together is going to be faster than stuff that requires you to bounce around. The metaphor, going back to the constant book metaphors I use, it's like if you want to look up 4 words in a book, it's going to be faster than looking up 4 words in 4 different books, right? Like, even no matter what the 4 words are, no matter where they are in the book, conceptually, the amount of work in mode switching is going to be a lot more. So some of the underlying benefits you get from all of this stuff that's talked about is batching. And batching, not just from it is nicer to batch together, but literally like the full pipeline of going through the process of opening the doors, down the corridors to collect all the stuff it needs to get the data, to package it and send it back. It's not just gains on your side or on the operations, it's gains on the architecture for how it literally marshals data back and forth and optimizations it can do under the hood. So that's kind of why a lot of this stuff is very valuable. But it does make your code look horrible usually, which is the trade-off. So.
Yeah. Especially if you have like everything running in singular fashion, and then that one method decides that it needs everything batched and then sends it off, and like, why is it working like this? Why can't I just insert things in the middle? How do I? Yeah. And that actually is the grievance with dots, right? Isn't it? Just because it's data-oriented design, not human-oriented design.
Yeah, like I'm always a proponent of saying that we do live in a world where everything is getting ridiculously slow for no reason, and I respect the arguments that say, why is it that Photoshop used to open up instantly, but now when it's machines are orders of magnitudes faster, I click Photoshop and it takes about a minute for it to open on my high-end SSD on my high-end machine just to open the base empty page. There is arguments to be made for software bloat and unnecessary amounts of work and whatever, but I do think you have to balance that, right? And to go back to your point before about it is the user experience first. No one's looking at your code, but I would also say the same thing in terms of performance. You should make decisions that will benefit you based on when or why. And so decisions like we intend to release on a mobile platform, therefore it is an intrinsic part of our thing to support these lower end stuff, fine. But I would say more often than not, the bottleneck for games isn't usually performance. And a lot of people will fight me on that, but fine. But the truth is, a lot of games either don't come out. So that's one. Getting a project done is the first bottleneck. Two, even if it does come out, a lot of them are really hard to work with or maintain. So if there's bugs or issues that you lose half your user base because it's literally unplayable or whatever, or it takes you ages to fix things, that's two. Three, games don't usually live long enough to maintain a user base. Even a game like No Man's Sky, if it comes out quote unquote wrong that people expect, you have to keep maintaining it. And if the code's unmaintainable, it doesn't matter how fast it is at being unmaintainable, it's not going to be any good. So I think while in performance is a very important metric, it's an important for either very specific kinds of games or a game at a certain point in its life cycle. And that's not to say you shouldn't be thinking of performance early, but there's oftentimes a lot of 80-20 rule stuff where you just, if you know underlying what's going on, you can make some really good decisions early. But for the most part, honestly, like people who release games regularly get to lecture about performance. If you haven't released a game yet, release a game and then lecture about performance. And this is as someone who doesn't release games, and so I'm not going to go on big pitches about performance, because to me, I think it's more important to make things and make them work. And so that's what I focus on until such time as like you're at the point where you're micromanaging performance, you know?
Yeah. And to be fair, a lot of games don't even have high performance requirements. Like, there are many games where you won't face more than 5 obstacles, 10 enemies, interact with like 30 UI elements at a given time. You're not going to have big issues in standard games. The games that try to overachieve are where the performance starts mattering, and even then, you can make nuanced decisions depending on what is causing you the biggest bottlenecks, and you can just make your life a bit harder there, but everybody's going to have a good time. And
if you even ask, if you polled like 10 people whose jobs it are to make games more efficient, and ask them what the biggest gains have been, I would say more than anything else, they'll tell you there is something to do with rendering or memory. More than anything else, it is going to be someone is literally instancing stuff that doesn't need to be instanced, or they will be creating objects that are not being seen, or something which realistically, if you think it's going to be optimizing your like order of operations of your scripts or your code, or that you're running this update loop too many times, if that is your problem, then congratulations, that is a fantastic problem. If the most performance impacting thing in your code is the order of your vector math, then that's fantastic. I wish I had that problem in all of my projects, you know?
Yeah. And also, on that note, caching is a huge thing, because there's a lot of games where literally the downfall is just calculating something every frame instead of making it and keeping it until such a time comes that it needs to change, and then staggering it, because if it needs to change every frame, then you're back to the original problem. And I want to bring it up in relation to how do I explain this? So, okay, sorry, I'm going to think a bit more about this and then I'll get back to
No,
it.
it's fine. I was thinking the same thing on that caching though, because I was thinking 90% of the times when I've seen problems with games, like there's always some rendering stuff that can be done and some optimization that can be done, but the big problems tend to all be things that are just solved with caching or just not running something stupid accidentally that people didn't realize was getting stupidly run. And most of the time,
Yeah.
if you just use a profiler, you'll catch that stuff. You just have to
And again, it's often like completely expected. I saw a project where the performance was tanking because they had a load of trees just in like an environment. You're like, oh, too many trees. No, one of the trees was really high poly, and there was 3 of them. You deleted those 3 trees and you bought back all of the performance. And there was other projects too where again, there was no pooling on any of the instanced objects. And it's like, well, then just add a pool, bang, suddenly all your performance back. Like, there won't always be a magic bullet like this, but it's just usually performance is something that you can tackle as a problem, and then normally there's like open the profiler, look for the big number spike, solve that problem, and iterate down, and you'll find by the time you're getting to lines of code optimization, you're already very far down. Unless you're literally making a game whose selling point is lots and lots of instance things, you don't need to go down the dots route, in my opinion.
Or pushing the bounds like inside with being able to play for 4 or 6 hours without ever loading. It's like when you're doing that kind of stuff, we're trying to do something far outside the norm, where you have to start thinking about this stuff way in advance. But normally,
yeah. So I have collected my thoughts on what I wanted to say earlier, and I'm going to try and make a case for it. So when you make a system in games, usually you start implementing it right away. There's not going to be the whole XAML, making a diagram, none of that stuff. People who do that try to do that, and then they face issues, and then their XAML goes away, and then their code is still looking a bit messy as they designed it without that consideration. So they're hacking around it. Now, that is all fine, but try to separate your intent from your implementation. There is something very nuanced here, where what you want to describe to the system so it can do it isn't necessarily tied to how the system needs to do it. And if you have a separation there, you can refactor systems and not have any pain of having to remake stuff. It doesn't become unmaintainable because the parts can be swapped out and made better without corrupting the way things worked before. And we had a case with that in Terraria, which is going to be really difficult to explain. But basically, we have a system that tries to iterate where the best point for your cursor is to place items in your range of the player, which changes based on many things. For example, if you have a small range seed that you can plant down, have a tree, or you can have a power that increases your placement range by 20 blocks, which is in each axis, so 40 blocks total, 400 blocks total, sorry. And then you can have extra accessories on top, and you can have stuff that extend the range even further. So we start iterating over many different blocks in the game. And for each tool that we have, we run different operations on what should be the best block to aim at. So, for example, if you hold a painting brush, we need to find a place that is not painted with the paint that you are holding to paint with, because you don't want to paint something that you already painted. If we hold down a seed, we need to find a spot in the floor that is good enough such that the tree will grow, which is its own set of tons of block calculations to see, is there enough space here? Is it in the sunlight? Is it in water? Because this seed can't grow in water. A lot of small stuff like that, and it becomes a gigantic system. But we separated it out into steps that we can customize, and then it can just run clearly and cleanly, and the implementation can be improved massively. We can cache things, we can not check the stuff that we already checked in calls before, etc., etc. Now, this is actually an iteration because that code already became fine when we did like the first 10 small steps in it, and it's like suddenly like, oh, it's not an issue anymore. Okay, we can move on to something else. But we have a better version of it in the background in case such a time arrives that it becomes a problem again. And this is the power of it, because we only had to swap one tiny bit, and we didn't even plan for it. We didn't have to rewrite everything. So there you go.
That if anything, like if I ever had merch, a version of that opening statement is something that I'd probably have on a shirt, because that's if there's anything I try to get across to people, it's the difference between what you intend to do and the implementation details. Like the concept of what is the rule versus what is the implementation detail. I swear, I feel like that's the thing that I just cannot get across to people, because they are so, when I say you have to put in just enough architecture to give yourself the freedom to make future decisions, a lot of people hear that as, well, that's over architecting, you're adding too much work. And it really isn't. To have a boundary line that, if you're a company that delivers t-shirts or some product and you're making them yourself manually by hand, that's fine until it isn't. And so building a system where somebody comes and collects the t-shirts from a certain location means if you later on switch to a company producing the shirts, and as long as they can deliver to the same location, delivery driver can pick it up from the same place, you can comfortably swap that out and nobody's any the wiser. You can increase the system as demand increases and neither system is broken. But if they're coming to your front door and you have to suddenly change address to the place where the new delivery people are, that is a ripple effect that now breaks both systems, because both systems have to change their information to support it. So the idea of having an intermediary in the middle has got nothing to do with over-architecting. It is about giving yourself the freedom to say, this isn't a different architecture, it is the name of the contract, the thing I need. I will deliver you X and you deliver it to Y. I don't care where it comes from or where it goes, but that is our contract and you deliver outside of it. So you still write the minimum implementation, you just do it to a contract, to your business rule. And if you have your dependencies of what you intend to happen, anything that changes that fulfills that requirement is still fair game. And that's the bit that people miss, is that if you're saving systems lacking performance, well, as long as the saving contract's in place, you can change where you save it to. If the memory management for calculating whether I should attack or not is based on a 50-point variable calculation of nearby characters, you can do it by using raycast to start. But if later on you start pre-caching all the positions and calculating distances, you can do that and nobody's any the wiser, because the contract says, get me nearest enemy, and I don't care how you do it. So extra architecture doesn't inherently mean less performance. It just doesn't. It means you are giving yourself the freedom to make that problem solvable without having knock-on effects to the rest of your architecture.
Excellently spoken.
Yeah, and I think people get confused by it too, because they think that it has to be a lot more complicated than it necessarily needs to be. And you can't, because I think in those situations you're talking about all the time, that's the code that you're going to write. You just need to separate it out so that it's not in the same class, essentially. The core of it is essentially pulling out that part that's doing that into some other boundary or some I say interface, but I don't mean an actual interface type, but some place that you're pulling it from and getting that, whatever it was, the correct enemy or whatever data you want to try to get. I think people think that just because you use the word architecture, it has to be super complicated. It certainly doesn't.
Absolutely not. And just to drive that point even further home, imagine a case where you have a bunch of items. And some of these items can be swords and bows and whatever have you. Each item may have damage, the amount of time it needs to be used, its range, if it shoots a projectile, the projectile speed, if it shoots the projectile, which projectile it shoots, if it uses ammo, which ammo type it uses. And you start making your items and you start typing that all in. But if you suddenly need something new for all the items, like a new flag on them, for example, what happens if swords are now swings and you want to hit a sword that stabs? Do you have to go back on all the swords and assign them to be swing or not? Just by making a method, this is sword parameters and this is bow parameters, you get the ability to go into this is sword and set that one swing tab and rename the method to this is swinging sword. And now all your old swords have the proper new stuff that they need. And you can just add the new stuff later for anything new that comes up. And with this single change, you don't have to go back to 1,000 swords that you have in the game. And no, I don't have trauma in Terraria because so there isn't a lot that has to happen to gain both performance and iteration speed. There just has to be some cleanliness at the start. You convey the intent of what you want, you don't have to write every single line of code to convey that intent manually.
Yeah, and I often find that I understand that conceptually this stuff can be confusing in the space of code, which is why I always defer back to boring real life examples, because to me, it's a lot of these concepts are surprisingly intuitive if you're willing to step away from the complexities of code and architecture and syntax and just like think about the problem. And that's why I always come back to the delivery driver one, is that how much information do you personally need to have about the person that delivers your packages? Well, the ability of them to take a package off you. That is it. In fact, at the point of you doing a delivery, you don't even really know any of the driver themselves don't know the company or who the delivery person or any of that. Their job is they've been given a place to get a thing from and a place to put it. And oftentimes it's a depot, and the depot then goes and takes it elsewhere. So the point is that there's a minimal amount of information, which means if any part of that changes, it causes no impact to anybody else. And so if the company upgrades and gets new teleporter technology, it has zero impact on you personally, because the point is someone will still be at your door to collect the thing, and the process downstream changes. So as long as you understand that the point isn't to, people talk about hiding or hiding complexity, or they don't like code that's over architected because it's hard to see what's going on. Well, good. You shouldn't see what's going on. You should have an intent. You hand it a thing and say, please make this do the thing. And then you get a thumbs up or thumbs down if the thing happened. And then whatever that is can be changed or grown or monitored as required, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the problem is when you don't know what's going on and you want to change what's going on, and then you're trying to debug. That's where people hate the over abstracted stuff, when they have to go in and work on the system and add stuff to it, but it's too difficult to add to, or too difficult to extend to add in the new use cases that weren't there 4 years ago when the system was first built.
One thing that I want to bring up here is that separation of concerns, that you shouldn't need to know what is going on, reduces the author's agency, which is something that a lot of people hate because they want to have control over what they're doing. They want to have the ability to understand and make nuanced edits when they need them, because you make a project, new requirements may show up, you need to understand what is going on in order to support change. And the intent doesn't have anything to do with that. I just want to make that extremely clear. A really good place where you can see that is dots, specifically because you make a component that offers what you want to have. That isn't what's going into dots. That's just the parameters you want to make components out of. And then you can look at those parameters and say, well, okay, this has over 100 damage, so I'm going to add an instant kill tab instead, because this is what happens when I decided in this game, things need to die instantly. And that gets to be put into use during the runtime with systems, with whatever have you. And all of that information is still entirely intuitive and clean to you. At runtime, it may be slightly more complex, but it's still just simple bits of data running on simple systems. And it's not difficult to hop between points. This is literally two hops. You literally just go into that offering component, you find the one data component that gets added, see which systems it gets put in, and then it's there in the system. It really cuts down a lot of the hiding of information from the user, because in the system it's all public. There is no private data that nobody has access to. It's really good to know.
Well, you guys want to move on to the next topic, or you got more
Yeah.
performance stuff to talk about?
Jason?
I'm out of.
No, I think that's it. Yeah, I'm a very low performance person. I think that's as far as I can go on that one.
So, I don't know. There were a couple other things that we had on the list today. One of the things that I wanted to just talk about with everybody that's in chat as well was all of the layoff stuff that's been going on. I know Yora has never been laid off before. I don't know about you, Jason.
Still my first job, yes.
Oh, were you? Okay.
I think twice in my life. One of them was well deserved. The other one wasn't. Although one of them was working in McDonald's for 1 week, so that doesn't really count.
Oh, nice.
I was a kid. This was a job. I wasn't very good at that job. I was very impatient, and I didn't like the tediousness of it. But there was one programming job I ended up being let go from. To be fair, they ran out of money and then hired me back the year later. So I don't know if that entirely counts, but that's the closest, I guess.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, and when it when it happens, it's usually I think layoffs are 99% of the time money related. It's because they're spending more money. They want to try to reduce that. So I mean, I've been laid off too, and I figure like, yeah, if they run out of money, that's when you're going to get hit by it. But I've also been at a bunch of companies when they did other layoffs and stuff, and the one thing that I noticed, especially like the first time I was hit with layoffs, was that everybody got hit hard except for engineering. Like in game development, and in the software companies as well. Like when we're doing at other places that were not games, it's like the QA department gets hit, testing department, the design department in games and stuff gets hit a lot.
QA especially, man, poor QA.
Yeah.
They're always considered
Customer
the
service,
sacrificial lamb. Yeah.
management
It's-
a lot gets hit. It's like everything except for engineering's like the last to go when it comes to these tech companies, at least the ones that I've been at. And I think it's largely because they're the hardest to replace because there's all the internal knowledge. It takes a lot of training to kind of get used to the systems and stuff and to really understand and be productive. At least that's like the explanation.
I always thought it was just optics.
What's that?
Just purely, I always thought it was just optics. If you were to look at a physical product you're holding in your hand and say, who made this? And you can point at that guy. That's the guy who did the thing that makes the thing do the thing. What about this chest? Who made that thing? That guy. He made the model that did the thing that made the thing that did the... Okay, cool. What do they do? Oh, they tested it all works. Okay. Where is that? Show me where that is. And it's like, oh, it doesn't work like that. Well, then get rid of them, right? I think it's just a poor misunderstanding of the value of that process. So I think it tends to be the sacrificial lamb that goes first tends to be the people that you can't justify the explanation of immediately.
But there is some argument to be made there, though, because if there's nobody creating new stuff to test, there's really nothing to test. Not that means that you don't need to test it, but
I'm not going to justify losing QA because they're very important, but I want to say that there is one more consideration there, which is if a company is seriously under financial duress and they do need to keep making stuff, the QA process only happens when there is something to QA, as you said. And when you release a version, it's already released. This is past the time to be QA'd. There are windows when QA personnel don't have something to do outside of regression testing or handling new reports. But if you have a bunch of them and there's only 1 or 2 reports coming in, they're not going to have something to do for the entire amount of time that they have. So you need to find something for them to do. And if you're in a company that doesn't have the ability to wear many hats, what do you do with them? Now, I'm not saying that you fire them. It's not something I'm advocating for at all. Giving them new skills and letting them advance into other topics in the future because they know things inside and out, great, in my opinion. But a lot of companies won't do that because maybe they're under financial duress. So
it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy because if you don't have QA, what happens? Well, you get more bug reports, which means you need more dev time, which means the devs are busy, which means the devs are extra important now, which means you definitely have to keep the devs. So who do you get rid of now that you need the devs? So it keeps fulfilling that loop constantly.
But it's not just QA though that gets hit, right? Like the marketing department will get hit. I mean, pretty much everything.
Design is another big one. Yeah, I've noticed that.
And design,
yeah.
I feel like
admittedly, there is a lot of say in I am firing these people because I can sub in for their job, and this is just something in the ether because, yeah, you may, but you don't necessarily have all the know-how to succeed at their job in proper capacity, where in programming you literally cannot without the knowledge. This is the problem. You are able to do it but not well versus you are not able to do it.
That's a very fair point too. Yeah, I don't know. I just saw all of the layoffs and stuff that have been happening lately, and I know that a lot of programming and engineering got hit with it, but I still just from what I was looking at, it looks like it's a smaller percentage of the companies that are getting hit on the engineering side, which again, not a surprise at all. Like I said, when Sony did their layoffs, I don't know if anybody got laid off from program. There might have been a couple, but it felt like it was almost the entire engineering team was still there and I got rehired onto actually got laid off in that one because I was in the QA department, and then got rehired on into the engineering department right after the layoff. But it was, I mean, like I said, I've seen it a bunch of places, and I've just noticed that was like the one thing where even if there were layoffs coming, if you were in engineering and you weren't just doing nothing, if you obviously if you're doing in the team and you're just haven't been contributing for years, then you're probably going to go. But if you're actively contributing, then it seemed like you were relatively safe. Obviously not 100%, but a lot more than just about any other position at the company. So that was.
It is also worth noting that even if you are in a position where you get let off as a tech person in general, someone who's in more engineering roles, you're very rarely without a job for long. I mean, of all of my friends who work in different jobs than myself, one thing that I always say, regardless of the money or anything else, you have a level of job security that's really hard to shake. Because there's stuff I don't like doing, but over the careers of stuff I've learned, is I could always go back. Like I still know how to do a website, or how to, be a DBA, or how to do some basic DevOps. I don't want to do those jobs. They're not particularly my favorite kinds of jobs, but they're the kind of skills that once you have them, like your potential job pool is considerably higher, because already in the field I actually want to be in, there's a lot of jobs that might want to hire you. But even if you don't, there's always something. Like it's very hard to be in a position. You have to be moderately not good at your job to be in a position where you can't find one. Now, again, whether you might be unhappy in it or whether it's not your ideal job, whatever. But again, I find that's one massive thing that people don't mention as much about programming, is that it is you do kind of have a job for life at that stage. Whereas, like, literally, you can go to a local library and work as their tech guy. Like, there's so many simple things you could do if you've got a fundamental, basic tech background,
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
In regards to the senior ones, we're the only one who made it at Aaron Carter's job. There is a lot to say about fostering new talent and advancing people into the topic. When you give away a person after you taught them a lot, you're basically going back to square one, and that means in the future, if somebody higher up leaves, you don't have a replacement or anything close. So I do think this is a bit of unfortunate, more than just the lost job, which is also very bad. But the company is losing value as well on this. You need people to be able to do multiple things and have replacements. If all of your stack of cards relying on one card being in the right place, and that card snaps, disappears, or otherwise goes sick and goes on leave, and nobody can replace that card, the stack falls down. In Relogic, we do our best to make sure that everybody can wear multiple hats. The lead QA has access to the code, and he started to do balance changes and even learned a bit of how to fix small bugs that are based in data, and even report more detailed things to the rest of the programmers, because he has access to the code, and when something runs and he has an error, he can show us exactly where it is. So that's really nice.
And this isn't random either. Like, literally, I worked at a company which hired me because the person who was dealing with their back end stuff went into surgery and died. And it wasn't a big surgery. It was a small, like, I think it was a foot or something like that. Just something that didn't seem like it was going to be a big deal. And then, I mean, it's obviously not the first thing people think about, but from a tech perspective, they were kind of screwed. That person had every password for all of the back end stuff, the entire systems they were working on. They didn't have someone to take over. They not only did they not have the information of what was already there, but they didn't actually know what that person's job really was, which is a big thing in tech, where a person owns a problem, but you don't actually know what their job is.
That's funny. At Qualcomm, me and another guy worked on a project together, and our manager didn't even want us riding in the same car together, just in case, because nobody else knew the stuff except for the two of us, and they knew it was going to be a giant nightmare. It's not funny. Your part wasn't funny, but the part when she told me not to get in the car with him because if one of us died, it was okay, but we couldn't both be dead. I was like, oh, that part was funny.
Yikes. I feel for you, Aaron Carter, in the comments. Sorry that everybody had to go away. I do want to point out, though, that with fostering talent, I want to really stress this point. Do not romanticize the people at your work. Everybody should be replaceable, not because you want to replace them, but because you don't want things to fall apart if they need a moment to breathe. When people are being depended on to the extent that if they are not there for a day, everything collapses, you don't give them space to breathe, and that can impact their mental health and long-term ability to stay, and more importantly, stay happy. The idea that everybody is a hero, that you have the hero of engineering, the hero of art, the hero of QA, and if they leave, it's not the team, it's not the Avengers or whatever you want to call it. That's terrible. You should have a backup and a team for every person so that they can have a moment to breathe, a moment to rest when they need it, and that they can be happy to work together and not alone and not shoulder the burden if something big comes up.
And oftentimes, like, to be honest, there's so much of this that's downstream. I think my hot take is, I think as much as I do the programming stuff mostly, I think project management is the role that is most kind of derisively treated badly by both tech and managers alike. And it's also the single most important job in any company, in my opinion. Because it's really, really hard to do the job correctly of making sure everything runs on time. And the problem tends to be that if you mismanage the hiring of a project manager, or the project manager doesn't get enough resources, or they don't feel equipped to solve problems to do their job, everything downstream fails from there. And one of the things, the whole siloing concept you're talking about, one of the biggest issues that stems from that isn't just the siloing itself, but the reason that happens is because not only do people assign a hero that like owns a problem, but it also means that because you feel like it's covered, you just don't have retrospectives on it. Like, if you're doing a project properly, there should be kind of semi-regular pause points. It says, hang on a second, we like literally haven't checked in with the back end in like 2 months. I mean, I think things fine. We have a good person on it, but like, how are we? And a lot of people, if you're put in that position of being like the hero of an area, you're not going to bring the micro problems to people, because you're just going to be like, yeah, it's my job, I'll figure it out. And, you know, if you happen to have a problem at the same time someone else has a problem, those two problems could coincide, and all of a sudden bigger problems happen, you know? And so having a culture, a more open discourse around that being like, it's a thing that we can discuss and combine, is usually a good idea, you know?
Yeah. Also, I just want to point out there's a bit of an air around us, and now Jason filled it. Yeah. Don't romanticize things. Let people work together in groups. Point it out when firing happens. It is important to foster talent for the future. I wish you all the best with your works. And to the people who are trying to pass their internship interviews, do your best to convey good intent and study properly.
Yes, and research the people that you're interviewing with. Be nice to them and make them happy. Make them like you. It's the most important part. They gotta like you and think you can do the job.
Yeah. Do you want to move on to the next topic?
Yeah, what was the next topic?
Well, we still have the idea of talking about working on different platforms, and it's more than just performance-based.
Yes. Yeah, let's dive in. So, where did I forgot? You were talking about something. We were talking about something at the beginning before the show, right?
Yeah. So a friend of mine and I discussed the problem of offering UI for different platforms. He noticed that when you play on a phone versus when you play on the PC for a certain game, the UI shifts dramatically. Some things move to the side, some things become banners in the middle, some things became circular radials because you need the touch area. And how do you even offer all that UI? And it became a really complex topic about discussing what actually changes when you change a platform. Performance is a necessity, but it is not something that will drastically alter how you want the game to be played. So it's an implementation detail. Systems do need to change because different specs, like usage methods, can impact how you'll want to play the game. In a game with a mouse and keyboard, you can point at things that are small and with high precision. You don't have the problem of being on a gamepad and missing every headshot because you steered the joystick slightly to the right. So, as an example, aim assist becomes a thing. But it's way more than that. There is the idea of making UI that you can traverse with navigation arrows because you don't have a pointer that you can just move around. There is the idea of affordances and clarity. Does a game that you watch from a faraway screen have the same clarity as something that you're sitting right near you with a handheld? Do you need to start adding new hints, maybe increase the brightness, small things to stop bad experiences? There's also the idea of different platforms preventing you from having different access to web APIs and execution of dynamic code. For example, Apple won't let you run things that are dynamic, so they don't get a breach and people start pirating, whatever have you. You can't compile on runtime. You have to compile ahead of time. And even in a more basic manner, how do you pull inputs? What is a pointer anyways? What is touch? How do joysticks actually work? How do you calculate how much should you move across the screen at every given point in time? There is a lot to unpack here, and I wanted to hear your opinions if you have any fun stories.
Oh, there's a lot. Like one of them, again, which even shows the counterpoint to that, which is if you've got a game on PC, because you talk about UI. UI is my favorite of all of those topics in particular. But if you've got a game where the graphics are up really high, you might have a lot of grass because you can afford a really fancy grass shader. But if you've got collectibles that are sitting in the grass, they'll be very hard to see. But so what you might do is what a lot of games will do is the objects will actually scale proportionately as they get away from you. So an object on the ground is actually larger visibly when you're further away from it. But you don't need to do that in a game on mobile where you've cut down the graphical effects. And so you can alter the effects you're performing on objects to support the platform and devices that you're on. But the one that specifically I think is more interesting than that you mentioned is the touch issue. I think that's a really fascinating one because a lot of people don't see it as just input, but they see it as a balance thing. Because think about it, if you've got a game where you're moving the mouse around the screen, there's a certain amount of time that it takes to do certain actions, and there's certain things that are presumptive of that. If you've got a game where you've got two fingers touching the screen and tapping, that's literally a balance change. Like the game fundamentally performs differently than it did before. And so you have to take that stuff into account. And I think the best example of this I've ever seen is the company Supergiant, who make a whole lot of great games, if anyone's played any of them. I think my favorite being Bastion, one of the older ones. They actually talked about how they were porting it to multiple platforms. I think they had like 5 platforms by the end of it. And they did a whole big write-up, how they said that they did originally port it, but the controls just weren't right. They just didn't work as they ported it. So they completely redid the entire input scheme across different platforms to make the games fit, you know?
Yeah, and even in smaller capacity in games, in Terraria, we had to actually redo the entire UI for mobile because now you need space to actually see where you move, and certain corners of the screen were already used by the rest of the game UI, so they had to move, they had to change. We don't have as much free real estate of buttons of item slots to show you in a single given point in time because the screen is suddenly tiny. You could say that all the pixels are there, but when it's less than the size of your thumb, it's going to be really difficult to see what you're looking at. So changing all the UI for that has been huge because now you start having to have UI tabs. And there is something I saw in a presentation that I don't remember anymore. It was on YouTube. But somebody said there's something very important. It's better to have 100 UIs of a single simple query than one UI showing you 100 different queries. Like, what do you need to do today? What do you need to do tomorrow? When do you take leave? Who is working right now? All of this stuff that happen in a single given working day on whatever management app you use for checking your time. They don't necessarily need to be all in one screen. If you need to manage a lot of stuff, you don't want them in one screen for the sake of efficiency. You want them to be simple to work out. This is especially more important with doctors and stuff that actually need time-crucial input. They don't have the time to read how the children are feeling 5 weeks after they took their medicine from a survey. They don't have the time for that. They need to know what's going on right now, what's the most important ticket, etc., etc. So showing the simple
figure out
UI,
what that important info is and put it on the screen. On this topic you guys are talking about, one of the things that popped up a lot in my head was I remember when the first iPads came out and the iPhone, and having to build for the, but even just both of those, like they're this almost the same platform, just scaled differently, needed a complete UI rework, right? Like there's the UI that works fine on an iPad, kind of like you were saying, as soon as it's tiny like that, everything falls apart. It's hard to click on precision things, and you have to redo it, and you have to come up with a totally different scheme.
And there's so much other things too. Like one aspect ratio is not the same as resolution, and so you get into weird scenarios where it's positioned in the right place, but it's scaled very differently. Or one of the biggest ones from a pure aesthetic UX design perspective. When you make things smaller, there is less pixel space, so lines become denser, and so that visually has the effect of one, muddying the details, but two, darkening the image. So if you scale an icon down, the icon will literally become a dark blob because all of the lines will like quadruple in size. And so you actually have to design UIs differently. You might literally take the exact same icon and like get rid of the strokes for the outlines for smaller sizes. And then when you do that, the other trade-off too is the way colors are interpreted are different at different sizes, because without getting into a whole big fancy thing about how monitors work, we see color by combining little dots beside each other. And so literally when you put a bunch of dots together, they are going to be interpreted as a compound color. They're not going to be interpreted as three separate dots at that scale. And so you literally have to pick different colors at scale to represent different things. So sometimes you might actually have to hue shift or change icons just because it's smaller, so it looks like the original hue at scale. Like it's crazy. Some of this stuff gets really micro detailed, you know?
Yeah. Outside of light leaking, there's still like a lot that goes on, even in UI visibility. As you said, elements can change and grow bigger and smaller, but more importantly, there needs to be a flow. And something that a lot of games get wrong is that if they're designed for PC, they won't highlight the element that you're hovering over. And then you go and try to start playing them on gamepad, and suddenly you don't know where your pointer is. Something that I found really fascinating, by the way, was Destiny canonically had a pointer that you moved with your thumbstick. And I thought this is a really unideal design method because you have to start dragging around. I just want to move to the next panel to the left. Why can't I just press left and immediately be there? But it let me always know where I am. And they had a singular UI that fit every content creator I watched. So I didn't have a problem. Like, what is this menu? Where did it come from? Oh, wait, where did it click? Because you can actually follow it around. I'm not advocating for it. I don't love it. But immediate pointer transitions are something really important to have good visibility with. One cheat I can say that I really love doing with that is having little particles that follow around what the selected element is, and just giving a line that shows you the direction of where it's moving to as you move around really quickly. I specifically remember it being fantastic in Ori, which isn't UI heavy at all, but it looked fantastic there. And I tried implementing it myself. Mirza Beg on Twitter has a really fancy display for it. If you want to see how to do that yourself.
Nice. Do you have to have a link for that? I'll pull it up. He makes some awesome articles.
Yeah. So this is Mirza Beg, and he is amazing. He has a VFX pack on the asset store as well, and he does a lot of really fancy stuff. Really worth going through his entire catalog of media.
There we go.
Yeah.
Pull it up here. Yeah, he does some really cool stuff on the asset store. So.
Yeah, and he's really good. If you have questions or stuff, he had great support for me before. Really appreciate his work. I just wanted to bring it up in the sense that adding visibility to what's going on with user interface is just as important as gameplay. Giving time for actions to process is also really important because I don't remember who told me this, but a game like chess had a problem where the AI that you play against could play its move instantly. It already knows what it wants to do. But because the AI could do its move immediately as you press the button for doing your own move, people wouldn't understand what's going on, and it wasn't satisfying, it was confusing. Literally making things take a bit of time for you to process, not for the sake of the computer, is extremely important.
And that, by the way, the main point behind this, why the screen freeze effect feels so juicy. It's a lot to do with the fact that you literally have time to register what's occurring. You get to enjoy the effect as it happens. Yeah, a lot of that UI stuff is very important. It's because, again, people look at it as UI on top of gameplay, but it's like the whole thing is gameplay. You're playing the game, and so the whole concept. It's why personally I have a big issue with diegetic UI, because I think it's a hack solution to a problem. Like, it doesn't really solve the problem it's intending to solve. But I do still think the biggest issue I have with this whole topic of the UI stuff in games is there's this really interesting idea. There's like three competing concepts. There's the game is generating data, and you as a creator want to give that data to the player. The more data they have, the better decision making they can make conceptually. Then as a player, you're trying to play the game, but you're also trying to make the best decisions you can, and so you need the most amount of information you possibly can. But at the same time, there's a context of what's going on. There's some event or story or something, and there's only a certain amount of relevant information at any one point for what you're doing. And so you have to make a judgment call of all the information that's being generated, which is relevant to what they are doing now, and showing them that, but no more. And I think it's one of those things that's very tough to get right. But I would always err on the side of, it depends on the kind of game. Obviously, if you're doing a RTS, you want to give people more information than if you're doing a first-person shooter, where realistically they don't always need to see the names of every enemy they're seeing, right? Sometimes you only show the names of the enemy when they get within range of potential combat at certain stages or whatever. But I do think that if your game is very information-heavy, almost universally, if you can either turn the information off, make it optional, or make it something that only shows up in context, it's almost always the right idea. There's an interesting kind of dichotomy debate between the idea of mode switch. Mode switching is the concept we're talking about. Basically, you basically mode switch into what you're doing. And from an artistic perspective, if you're creating an application that's for content creation, some people consider mode switching a bad thing, because as a creative, you need to be able to do all of the things all of the time and not be constrained by a mode. But as a person playing a game, you are in a world where the creator of the game has intrinsically placed a mode. So whether you agree with that philosophy or not is kind of irrelevant, because if you're in the tank, you know the player is in the tank, and therefore only tank-related information is relevant. If you're running around outside, then the tank information is presently not relevant when you're not in a tank, right? Whether or not you like the idea of mode as a concept, it's still there. And so the question becomes, can you divide your world into modes and then effectively show the information as is relevant? And it's, yeah, I really hate seeing too much UI in games. I do think that fundamentally people over focus it, because what happens is your eye is your point of focus, and it should be moving around the most interesting point on screen, whatever's most engaging. But if you have health bars and stuff, and the health bar flashes, and then the ammo bar blinks every time something upgrades, your eye's doing this the whole time. And whether or not you're physically kind of engaging with it, it will take you out of the game, because you're so focused on the peripheral information that you're not paying attention to the experience you're having. So move stuff closer to the eye line, move stuff closer together, try to use contextual clues so stuff only shows up when you're near them. There's a lot of stuff you can do that just cuts down on all that clutter and noise.
And something that a lot of people don't give enough credit to, following the information is extremely important, because if you don't give people good tools to follow information, they'll start going to use auxiliary information to find what they're actually looking for. In Terraria, we have a very interesting case where bosses can be off screen when they're doing a certain attack, and they're slower than you and you're running away. And as soon as they are off screen, something very interesting happens. Most players will start looking towards the minimap, because the minimap has an icon of where the boss is. And when they're exploring, something even more interesting happens. They turn on the minimap into full screen view, and they move around without actually seeing the map. They see the icon of themselves moving around. And this is especially paramount in... So Terraria has floating islands. And we have gravitation potions that let you start falling off into the sky, reverse gravity. Now, this is great, because if you don't pay attention to where the floating island is, you will still see the minimap. And this is one advanced tactic that a lot of players uses. They literally just drink the potion, fly off into the sky, and start moving around up and down until they scan for the area where the floating island is. But they are not watching what is actually happening on screen. And we have harpies that shoot feathers at them, and then they die. So there you go. I wanted to share this one video when we talked about stopping for processing what is going on. It's also really important for good feelings. So Masahiro Sakurai, again, big fan, has a video about stopping for big moments, which discusses hit stop and a concept he calls boss stops, which let you see even more important things with extra emphasis. I really recommend everybody watch this, especially if you're working on games, but you don't even need this just for games. A moment of stopping to confirm that you made a good action in an API when you made an order, seeing a circle that says, yay, order complete, they are significant to user experience. And one thing I want to touch on before we move on to whatever next topic we do have, in terms of UI, there's a lot of stuff that I see people using wrong in Unity specifically, and I wanted to just bring it up. So when you work in UI in Unity, Unity has a thing called an event system. This event system has separate input modules. And these input modules are what actually handles your input and gives it to the event system. I'm being very explicit here. It gives it to the event system. It isn't directly the part that you interact with. You can make your own input modules, have your own rules. Every single time that you're working with different input systems in Unity, they bind into it in a different way. If you used the new input system from Unity themselves, they made their own input module to work with that event system, and they extended the event system to make a multiplayer event system so they can support their multiple player inputs components. You can touch all of these systems, but the idea is something gives you inputs, something processes these inputs, and the thing that does the processing is the event system. It looks up all the UI elements. It chooses what is the selected UI element. What the hell is a hover? How do you navigate? It does all of that. So you can change it, and there is a lot of power in doing that. But more importantly, you can immediately control what is being selected. And this has huge impact on navigation. When you enable one menu and move to another menu, you can literally just call a method set selected game object in the event system, and then that element is immediately selected. You don't have some weird transition where it picks the wrong element, etc., etc. Learn to use it, please, especially if you're working on Gamepad. And even if you don't use Gamepad, make your event system support WASD. You want to be able to navigate UI with your WASD keys and space to confirm, escape to go back. It's huge. Please do that.
But just a note too, as a side thing with that, because it tripped me up at least. That set select the game object. Keep in mind you are, depending on when you're doing it, it is an event system with a cycle, and you could set it at a time before or after when it sets, and you can get yourself in this frustrating situation where you set it but it hasn't set yet, and it's just be careful when you're doing that.
Yeah, you can wait for things to happen if you have an animation where nothing is selectable. You can
or literally wait till do a coroutine and wait till end of frame or something and just verify that it does hit or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So there.
Story, did you have anything else on this one, or do you want to answer the question that Aaron asked about earlier?
Oh, the Peter Principle one?
Yeah, you want to tell everybody what that is if you didn't have any more on the other one?
Yeah, sure. So just to catch people up on the missing prior conversation, Aaron was saying new job got sort of effectively is or will be pseudo-promoted to a position that's technically nothing like what they're doing, but they're in tech, I guess, and so it's the logical next step when someone leaves the company to hire somebody else that's junior under to kind of promote them up. And this is something I see all of the time in so many companies, where somebody who is the technically senior developer or project manager or some other title that actually has a meaning and a job and a task they should be doing, and is basically just somebody who's been hired up from a prior development job into that role because that's the next step, and they've lost the person in that role. And the company has no concept of what that person's job set or skill set is. And so what the Peter Principle states is you will be promoted up to your level of incompetency. And what that means is You're good at your job. So you're like, well, the person above them is left. They're the next logical person higher up. So you hire them. If you manage to do the job well, next time it happens, you'll be promoted up again. But as soon as you're put into a job position, like going from senior developer to project manager, which are very different skill sets entirely, like night and day abilities, you might find yourself being a very bad project manager and not really knowing what your job is. And then they probably won't fire you because you've been good up to this point, but you're not going any further. And so that's the Peter principle. You are moved up to your level of incompetency. And once you become incompetent, that's where you stick. And that's why so many large companies have lots of incompetent people in jobs, because they weren't originally at the job they originally had until they landed at the job with which they're not good at, and that's where they're stuck. And so you follow that chain the whole way down, you've got a lot of really bad people in really bad roles.
This is definitely very true. It feels like it's more true the bigger the organization is too.
And it's something more and more. And it's something that you'll learn to feel a lot if you go up in ranks and start getting new tasks. You got hired for a specific task, and you don't necessarily have the skills for a new task that you will be given that is not in the same realm. And as you start transitioning between roles, you're going to have to need to learn how to do the new tasks better. Do not fall to the Peter principle.
And to be honest, someone like me tends to be the one that comes along because I'm a contractor normally, and I get brought into a company when the person who's the senior developer politely says, I need help, and they don't know what they're doing, and so they hire a contractor to help them, and then my job becomes basically teaching the person to do the job they've been hired to do, because they just haven't ever been given that training. And like, it's no fault of theirs, it's just on numerous occasions I've been brought into a company that have one senior developer, and that senior developer has literally never done 3/4 of the work they're being assigned before, and so they're desperately trying to learn on the job, and they just, like, it's very hard to do. It really is.
Even harder when they have to start managing too, and leading people, and they have no management experience or desire to do that. They just have been there the longest.
So there was one simple question I wanted to answer earlier. Somebody was asking about tree colliders in terrain. I did a small checkup, and I think the only thing that you need to do is have a capsule collider on the tree prefab that you're going to place with the tree colliders system. And it's going to just literally make an object there that is the tree that has a capsule collider, and then with collision you can just literally query for that. I may be wrong. I haven't used it in a long time. I hope that helps.
No, I think that should work fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Small things always stack up together.
Cool. Well, you guys
yeah, go ahead.
Have any other topics you wanted to hit this week, or should we wrap it up?
I think
Jason's story just mentioned something in chat.
Well, I don't want to derail, but I said if you're running out of ideas, then my own personal hobbies have recently been learning a lot of new stuff. So mostly tech and tools and stuff. So
yeah, let's talk about that for a few.
Yeah. So as I was saying before, so this is just actually, because I'm kind of curious in sort of the structure here. When you first, I'm curious how much of this matches with your own experience. When you first start developing, you have some tools you use, whatever the software, whatever, Visual Studio or VS Code or something, and inevitably you start learning shortcuts, getting better, and moving up the chain, and then you start doing different things like learning. Like the one for me, so this is kind of where I'm getting to, is I was a programmer for about 15 years before I ever learned to touch type. I was still typing at 35 words a minute when I was long into my career. And it wasn't until one time I was working at one company and I just decided every morning to spend 10 minutes on a typing trainer thing just while I had my coffee and started my day. And inside of a month, I doubled my typing speed. And that to me was a big sort of, I should pay more attention to where my time benefits are. And so from that moment on, I became really into productivity tools, and too much so now to the point that they're probably detracting. But I'm curious what everyone else's journey has been in terms of like stuff they've learned that are like those kinds of tools that they've switched to, and shortcuts or things that have kind of made them go, that's important. I think more people should be paying attention to this,
Yeah, in my own end, it's something that makes me press less buttons. Not in the sense of automation, but in the sense of conveying the intent of what I want to do and the actions I actually have to take in order to do that. One thing that's been huge for me lately, in fact, was getting the Eagle app that you recommended to me. So something that I didn't know when I started using it, I thought, oh man, this sucks to use, was that every time I wanted to save an image, I had to right-click, go down to where Eagle is, and then pick the place that I want to place it in Eagle. And I was like, okay, but this adds some clicks when I was already right-clicking, save image, save on the folder that it needs to save at. And I'm like, this is slow. But the Eagle extension for the browser is freaking amazing because I can literally just see an image I want, I drag it, and it literally pops up all the folders I have, and I just drop it into where I want. With a single swipe, I already have every single image I want to save saved to the proper directory. And it even sorts by the most recent. So if I'm on a batch of finding character designs or a batch of looking at fancy VFX, I can have all that. And it even works with videos. It's so good.
And I also have Alt-1 and Alt-2 are my shortcuts in the browser to snap the whole page if I want to capture it as like an article or something for later.
Yeah, I actually save links to videos I want to rewatch later. Things I'm considering buying has been a big thing because I don't have to find it again. It also keeps all the details in case the page goes down and I'm like missing something. Tags that it saves from the source that it came from and the link to the actual material that saved are both really great. In terms of personal improvements with the work I do, using remind functions has been gigantic. I don't have to remind myself to check the schedule and see what's going on because I can set a reminder as soon as I get a single time task. And that reminder is going to remind me. I don't need to maintain that information. And in cases that I need to prepare for something, I just set a reminder earlier in time with a generous estimate of how long I'll need. So that has been great for managing, especially as I grew into positions where I have to do a lot of stuff with different teams. So just as an example, in Relogic, I had to discuss with SteelSeries when we were working the integration for the peripherals, SteelSeries mouse, etc. And I have to deal with the localization team. Whenever we get a new need for localization, I have to make a batch, I have to zip it up, I have to send it to them, I have to get it from them, I have to port it back in, and I have to make sure that it works without replacing anything wrong. And more importantly, I have to answer them if they have queries. So setting regular reminders for that has been gigantic. It's small stuff, but it stacks up. And another thing that saves a lot of time is with code editors. Structure view has been huge, especially when you have big structures. Seeing every method name and being able to click it and hop to it, and just seeing what you're working with, the space that you have. Instead of like looking at a file and seeing what each line of code does, first look at the class name and what things it gives you. That's been big. In heavy use of IntelliSense and template generators has been also very nice. When I started working with dots recently, I upgraded my writer templates to have a template to make a job entity batch, make a component data and authoring component separately, doing a bunch of like stuff to move everything around. It has been big in cumulative gains.
Yeah, but a lot of that stuff, I'm glad to see I'm not the only one, because I always feel like I'm slightly over-engineering stuff. Although there is some that I still over-engineer. Like, for example, when you talk about capturing YouTube videos you want to watch later, I'll go and literally open the YouTube transcription thing, copy the text, paste it into Eagle, and that way if I type in a search word that's part of the text script of the video, I can jump to what that video was. So there's lots of really nice little over-engineering stuff you can do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys had me thinking too much.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what about you?
When you're talking about just things that changed your workflow, though, or realizations that you'd make, because you're talking about like with the typing and stuff, it reminded me of a couple of things, especially, but two big things. One was probably, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago when I realized that you could automate all of the tedious stuff, or at least a lot of the tedious stuff, like doing builds, copying files over, and setting up new systems, all of that kind of stuff. I started kind of getting really into it and learning that I could stop wasting most of my day doing a bunch of tedious shit and also kind of automate everybody else's tasks too. That was kind of one of the big things that I found that was super useful when working in a team, is being able to see the opportunities to automate stuff and simplify stuff, and then being able to just do that for other people and save them, a quarter of their day or a half of their day or whatever it was. And that was kind of a big one. But part of that also came from learning to watch other people work. That it's kind of like watching other people on the team and seeing what their actual workflows were and seeing the end result that was required too, like or the thing that to say you're working on a game, you want to see the people actually playing the game, you want to see how they're going through the game, what that looks like, and actually understanding it. And when it comes to like a business application, seeing the people that are actually using the application day to day and seeing how they use it, because it really kind of opens your eyes to better ways to do things and better ways to solve the problems and to actually solving the right problems. And the only other thing that really popped in my head was when I first started programming, I used to just do a lot of experimenting and very rarely read documentation because it was all in books and I had to go find the correct book, go find the right thing, and most of the time I didn't even have it. But early 2000s, all of the documentation for stuff started coming online, and I started to realize that when I wanted to figure out how to do something, it's a lot easier to just read through the docs, see exactly how the things work that I want to use them, look at the examples most of the time, instead of just going and screwing around with it for a few hours like I had to do in the early 2000s and the 90s just to try to figure out how something works, because they weren't really an option. But now that's all out there. There's so much information. It's usually much faster to go through that stuff.
Yeah, the thing with workflows is, unless you are really involved in seeing what happens minute to minute, you're not going to notice huge gains that you can have. Biggest times I find myself having this happen is I have to wait on processes, but the processes that I have to do a lot of stuff, the processes where I have to sit and wait until something is done, and then I can move on to other stuff. Automating these has been gigantic. In work cases in Relogic, we have a way to build a version of the game, and that involves quite a bit. We have to build the game for 3 platforms: Windows, Mac, Linux. Then we have to clean out some files that are auxiliary for the building process but shouldn't be in the release. Then we have to separately copy the files to a dedicated server folder so that we can pack it up and distribute it to all the players. People who want to host, you can download the server without paying on the main site of the game. We have to provide hashes of the builds for the mod loader for installation purposes. And we also have to start uploading it directly to the Valve backend to distribute it on Steam and also on GOG. And each one of these things is a lot of stuff to do. So, like, leave alone the fact that we have to build for 3 platforms, so everything has to run 3 times. There is the idea of building, cleaning, copying, starting to upload, and then you also have to set it live to whatever channels that you need to do, and you also have to mark the version properly. We started automating everything in bats, so we have clean steps of everything being done, and more importantly, verifying and blocking things from being done wrong. That has been huge, because if you miss a step, these crucial things, you don't want to upload the faulty versions. So validators that you don't have to trust because they don't let you do anything wrong, trust can only come from doubt, are gigantic. Another thing that I did that reduced iteration times drastically in hobby capacity, when you mod Unreal Engine-based games, you actually have to do quite a lot. So there is the running of a custom Unreal Engine version. You have to make your edits, and then you bake, and then you have to wait until that baking is done. And then you have to copy the files that you want into a specific folder structure so that they are isolated. This is just a mod for this one set of files out of the entire things that you added in your project that are just proxies for whatever is in the game. You just take these files, you copy them to another place, then you use some community tool called Patchpack, which you make a patch for the Unreal Engine game. Then you get the output file and you have to throw it into the mods folder of the game, and then you actually have to launch the game as well, and that goes through the Unreal Launcher, which God help you if it doesn't want to accept the shortcut entry. There's a lot of processes and a lot of waiting there and a lot of things that can go wrong. So I just automated all of it. I literally click build in the Unreal Engine version, and within 2 seconds, I see the mod running on the game. Now, sadly, the game still has a long loading time, but there are mods that I installed that skip everything to go straight into the gameplay. So there's a lot of fun stuff there.
Yeah, and it's also like it's good for even just your own development. Like for example, I use Flow Launcher as my main launching thing. Anyone who goes on my computer kind of freaks out because I've got no desktop icons, no taskbar, no visual anything. I do 99% of my stuff using a combination of Directory, Opus, and Flow Launcher. So it's like all keyboard command shortcut stuff. And so I write my own plugins for it, because if any app doesn't have support for Flow Launcher, I'm damn well going to make it support Flow Launcher. And the way you do it is you build a class library, just a standard project, and you drop it into a folder and it becomes a plugin. But to do that, I would have to make my DLL, take the DLL, open up the app data folder, drop it into the plugins folder, turn off the app and turn it back on again so it reloads the new plugin. Which I'm debugging a new feature. I want to add something. It's a pain in the ass. So I made a script that uses MS Build and goes through the process for me and does all that. And so I press build in my code and it will shut down, move it, copy, reload, and whatever. And that little thing is the difference between me wanting to bother adding a fun new feature, going, oh, I kind of wish this did this, and I'll just open it, write line of code, press build, and it's there. I wouldn't do that if it was going to be, okay, open the thing, make a build, copy the files, go to the directory. It's not a big difference, but it's enough that there's a psychological difference in how you approach development. So I find that stuff is very important.
Yeah, even if it takes you 7 hours ahead of time, it's about spending the time when you want to spend the time versus spending the time when you don't want to. This is especially important in cases of stress, because building Terraria before we added all these automations took us upwards of 45 minutes because we had to wait for each single process, pay attention, start doing the thing manually, make sure we do it correctly, start uploading, wait all the time, etc., etc. But reducing it to 2 seconds let us iterate really quickly, and we don't even have to think about it, and we don't have risks, and it gives us way more confidence when we make a release build, because if anything wrong happens, we can immediately patch it out. Speaking of which, if you are releasing games, please make sure there is a workday dedicated to fixing all the issues that come up with every single release. Don't release things into the ether and let people have a broken product. Think of your players, please. Good time is important.
That's why you don't patch on Fridays.
And one other thing too, because I just found it quite funny that you were mentioning it. I was talking about productivity stuff, and in my free time, it's not a priority, but it's something I am working on, is a course for Obsidian and sort of general tool development stuff. And so I have my stack here of notes of various, each one of these represents a video that has to be recorded at some stage. And I just bring it up because what you specifically said is regarding trust and that sort of resistance of doing tooling. And that is literally section, here we go. Come on, focus. Come on, focus. Nope. Figure it out. There, oh,
no, not. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Trust and resistance. There we go. I basically, there were very specific points, because that is 100% the problem. Is I find that from all the books I was reading on the topic, mostly they're talking about knowledge bases and where you put your information and Eagle, and we talk about all that. The reason most people don't use tools like that is because they don't trust them. Some stuff is there, some stuff isn't there. It's not a valuable resource because you can't trust that it does what you think it's going to do in terms of storing information. So all of this boils down to, do you trust the system enough? And the only way to get there is to use it in a way that kind of engenders trust. So that was the first one, and the other one being resistance that we talked about. So it's just funny because there's like 4 core tenets of this whole thing. I was trying to do a course on Obsidian, but it ended up just being about the philosophy of note taking. And those 4 things, those 2 were like 2 of the first 4 to cover. I just found that quite interesting.
Absolutely. And now I'm waiting for the upcoming set of videos.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get there. God, there's so many. It was a long pile of scripts that I've started writing out scripts, and they're taking a while. But one thing I will say is, as a small aside, the reason I bring up the topic is I've been very much focused on productivity stuff at the moment again. One, because if I'm going to write a course on Obsidian, I want to see where things are at the moment. So I started learning new plugins, figuring out what's going on. But the other part of it is I was thinking back to the story I told you at the start about typing and how it's comical to me how it's something I do every single day. Typing 24/7 at some degree. There's some point of the day I'm typing at minimum once. And it took me so long to get there. And now that I do it, it's like, it's incomprehensible that I wouldn't be able to type at like normal speeds. I say normal, but normal for a programmer of whatever, 80s. And I think I'm up to like 105, 110 words I can get to, but I average at 80 or something. It's still not amazing by most standards, but it's like, it's good for programming. But recently I've been trying to look at what's the next step for that. And I was, I think I was telling a few other people, is I'm learning Vim at the moment. And Vim, to be specific for the people who are going to be pedantic about this, I'm learning Vim commands. I am not going Emacs and Vim editor. I'm just the commands. We're just keeping it simple.
Explain to people who don't know what Vim is. What Vim is first.
Oh yeah, Vim is magic. It's like it's so hard to describe. Yeah, I mean,
it's a power tool text editor that has a lot of shortcuts and it does things differently from how you're used to. There is a small console. You can type things that you want there as commands to operate on the text. So instead of doing things with single buttons and repeating the actions, you can macro do action X times and save yourself some trouble.
Well, yes, that is true. But I think that's, to me, I think that wouldn't be a sales pitch for me. That's not why I jumped into it. What was my thing is that if you analyze your own time sitting at a computer programming. Now, this is less true for like a writer writing a novel, but it is true for most writers, especially programmers. One, how much of your time is actually typing? And the truth is, when you're typing, if you're programming, most of your time isn't typing, it's thinking. That's just a fact. If you put a camera on a programmer while they're quote unquote programming, 70% of the time they'll be staring at the screen with a dumb look on their face, scratching their heads. All, right? Yeah, just scrolling through Stack Overflow or whatever.
Just looking at the computer.
The remaining 30% of that time, if you look at what they're doing, it'll be scrolling the mouse or clicking the screen. And the remaining time actually typing is probably 5 to 8%. And so I can't do anything about the thinking. I'm kind of limited to whatever I've got up here. That's the best I'm going to do. I've learned as much as I can to kind of avoid how many Google searches I have to do. But with the second part, increasing my typing speed is good, but like that's not the bottleneck for me. The bottleneck is if I'm looking at a page of code and I want to get to a certain point on the screen, I decided I want to replace that word over there. How do I get there comfortably? And normally it's either grab the mouse, move, click the thing, or it's up, right, until you navigate roughly to where you want. What Vim promises is a series of semantically sensible ways to navigate a file. And so it lets you think about it. The keyboard by default, every key does something that isn't press a key. It does an action of some kind. And they all have some meaning. Like sort of select would be S and then D is delete. So they all have some semantic thing. And so what you can do is you can start stringing together sentences. So you could say D3 would be delete 3, or you could say SIW, select in word, and it'll select the next word. And it goes through, it lets you semantically talk about your text in a very interesting way. At a very baseline level, you can do things like, very simple, I want to select a certain word up there. I could type in / and a word, and it'll find the next instance of that word anywhere on the page. And then when I press N, it jumps to the next instance for each one. It's fantastic. Or if I want to change the 5th word on line 12, I can type :12, jumps to line 12, and I can type 5W, jumps to the 5th word. And then I change my mind. I don't want to change the 5th word. I want to change the contents of the next set of brackets. So I could type F bracket to jump to the next bracket on the line, or I can type SI bracket to go select in brackets. It'll select the contents of the brackets automatically. There's a whole lot of this, and it starts to get really, really crazy to the point where like it makes you rethink your understanding of how a computer works. I heard a lot of people talk about it before, and it sounded very much like this, oh, that's the elitist, silly programmer thing where you're trying to like be a hacker. But the truth is, people using Vim properly look even less like a typer than normal programmers do, because they type less. They just sit there and look at the screen and go, just tap the keyboard once and then it moves to the right location. So you find yourself typing a lot less and being a lot less dramatic. But it does mean that you start to strip away a lot of this. We talked about friction, and that's kind of why I brought it up from a friction perspective. it's so freeing to be able to say, I want to delete this line. And so I press D twice. Just deletes the line. I don't have to select, highlight, do anything else. And once you understand the basics, it does all of that. Yeah. And the reason to bring it up, exactly as Mr. Murray says there, I wouldn't have learned it if it was an editor. If it was drop Visual Studio to learn this Vim thing, or drop Rider, or drop whatever, I wouldn't do it. The reason Vim, or specifically Vim commands, if I'm being hyper-specific, Vim commands is this thing I'm describing. The Vim editor is the specific editor with all the extra fun toys that comes with that. But the commands is just a thing that sits on top of any tool. There's a lot of tools with plugins for Vim. And so the sales pitch for me is Git Bash is in Vim. VS Code can be in Vim. There's Idea Vim for Rider. Even Obsidian, where I do my note taking, has a default support in the settings to turn on Vim mode. That's it. So, I now can just do whoever I want. So I will admit it's made me far less productive for the time being as I try to get my head around what I'm doing. But it's very cool. It's to the point where it makes me rethink that my relationship to typing. And have I just been doing this wrong for so long? Because it starts to feel very intuitive once you get the hang of it and understand that you're talking to the code more, right? You're just saying, go back, go forward, next word. It kind of conceptually turns it, especially for game development, it turns the damn thing into a game where you actually start thinking, how do I get to that word? And what's the fun set of commands I can do to get there? And yeah, it's cool. I recommend it.
It's like chopping the cord of your mouse and then forcing yourself to use keyboard shortcuts. You get.
I'm not there yet. Yeah.
You're gonna have to learn it. Because you can do not all of that stuff, but probably at least half of it just in Rider or Visual Studio.
True, but here's my sales pitch for that. I wouldn't have bothered. I wouldn't have bothered if I felt comfortable with Rider. But the difference is there's a huge difference. One, you have to know relatively unique shortcuts for Alt, Shift, Space, Control, whatever. There's a limited number of those you can have. And more importantly, they're unique per application, which gets really frustrating. What's different is that I know how to select, highlight, jump, and navigate, and it doesn't matter where I am anywhere. And there's such a high benefit to that I don't need to, the one to navigate to a declaration in Vim is the same in Rider and in Visual Studio and in everything else. And so there's so much cognitive freedom in not having to know the unique per platform shortcuts for whatever it is. If you turn on this mode, it just works the way you want it to work. And this is without getting into a whole level above this that I won't even talk about, which is you can add keyboard shortcuts in editors, sure, for the commands that are available, but you can write keyboard shortcuts in Vim for anything in the world to do whatever it wants. So you can literally rebind it to do whatever tools you want. It's so powerful that it's again, it's like learning to type makes you feel like you're powerful, you're sort of using a sword and be able to fight. But learning Vim is like learning actual arcane magic. It's a whole level above everything else. It's crazy.
And the next logical step is that as you're going through this, you're starting to take manual actions. You're starting to batch them, macro them, and you start macroing the macros, and you start going up in steps to the point where you have a single button or a single keyword that does everything that you want it to do.
Yeah, and this is one last thing too, which is so crazy. You can real time, while you're typing, make these macros. So you basically can type Q to do basically start one. And so you start working, type a macro. So say you want to do something like select a line, delete it, and replace it with this word. You can do that action, save it and record it. And then you have a button that you can press, which repeats that action. And so you can start doing anything you could type, any set of movements or commands or whatever. You record it, save it. You can save multiple ones and you can replay them back. So now I'm nowhere near that. And I honestly don't even intend to. Purely, there's 5 commands. One of them being jump to any line, jump to any word, jump to the next one of any word, and contents inside the next bracket you can find. Those 4 alone have saved me 90% of the key presses that jump me around my editor. All the other stuff is fun toys, and maybe someday I'll get there. But if just the ability to look at a piece of code and go, I want to go to that word, and be able to do that without leaving the home row in under 4 or 5 key presses is mind-blowing. That alone is such a time saver.
Yeah.
Why were you not able to do that with regular shortcuts? Just using Control G, the line number, and then
again,
Control F.
It's not consistent, and you can't batch do it multiple times if you need to.
Oh, well, okay. Let me give you a different one. What if I would say there's on screen there's 3 instances of the word duck. You want to select the 3rd instance of the word duck. So not that one, that 3rd one down on the screen right now. Say it's 40 lines up and 30 lines down. How do you get there? What's
Control F, D, U, C, K, enter.
enter. Yeah, I suppose that would get you there. Yeah, but you can do the same thing with using /d_n. So just like just the same thing, and you can start getting to this
Don't
point
I have
where
to
it'll.
type in the word duck?
No, you can. I want to get into a whole big thing. There are ways to automate that. You could type duck and jump directly to it, but there's macros. Yeah, yes. I have a whole page of stuff on this, but the point is, it is surprisingly easy to get around. And the other part too. Actually, no, I won't go into this forever. But there's like little things too, which are we talk about the friction of the small costs. One of them being, if your cursor is in the wrong place on the word, it's a very small thing, but you end up moving one to the left or one to the right to like select to the end of the line or forward line. And we all know this, like how frustrating it is when you want to use the IntelliSense for like Alt Enter or something to do something, but you're not on the word. There's an exit key for each direction in Vim. So you basically can insert, append, or select the thing itself. And so it's a very small thing. But all of those times where I found myself having to like press back just to touch the word so that I could do the command in Writer to activate the drop down to do the swap with method body doesn't happen anymore because I can have it and enter the line on the exact character I want. It's so hard to describe these micro things, but like it is very different. And there's other parts too, which is that unlike the Writer shortcuts and stuff, Vim semantically understands the text itself. So you can jump to things in the shortcuts, but if you're finding arbitrary words, or you're jumping paragraphs, or you're jumping text, and yes, some of the shortcuts will jump you to method names and stuff, but you can do things like jump words and jump paragraphs and go back and forward, and it will navigate it as a code block, and it'll understand things like jumping to the next logical bracket sets and various different things that starts to give you a lot of really niche power. But like I said, even if you did none of those things, the ability to keep your hand center on the keyboard and just get to anywhere you want without having to use shift commands or controls or keys or offsets or anything is extremely powerful. So, and I'm not saying everyone should do it, but I'm just saying for me personally, having gone through the phases, this feels to me like the next one of those where I was like, oh, I went from typing to typing fast to now like my typing fast is comical in the face of somebody who can even do the basics of Vim commands, you know?
On that point, I have a similar progression going on right now, but it's in modeling specifically. So previously, I would just hack things together in sprites, just literally using Photoshop, making a sprite, dropping it in, doing whatever I want, programmer art. Then I had to start working with game engines, and they have like bootleg models that you can still programmer art, but in 3D. And you could use code to mesh them together, merge them, sorry. And that was still slow and not really great. You want to merge meshes for a lot of reasons, but it wasn't a great process. And you could write manual code, but you'll be restricted in what you're able to do, and there's no power tooling whatsoever. Then ProBuilder came along, and now you can edit meshes in a game engine to your heart's content. But that's still not a power tool. That it is a power tool in the context of being in Unity, in Unity's case, and Unreal has its block grid and some other things, but they are still not power tools. They are compromising tools, because you want to have more functionality within your game engine, but it still doesn't give you all the power in the world to do whatever you want immediately, quickly, with good shortcuts specialized for the task you are doing. So I tried moving to Blender, and in Blender, I learned how to do a ton, but the shortcuts are absolutely hellish. And if I have to do a long task, I still can't fully automate it, because there are still things that I'll have to repeat and picking things, and there is no magic in the world that's going to pick the right vertices for you. You can write Python scripts to start editing the mesh, but it's really not clear, and you're going to have a lot of interpreter issues and whatever have you. Not very quick. Now came Houdini, and Houdini feels like magic because I can automate every single task I ever want into a set of nodes. I can paste it in from any other project I have with the nodes. It loads extremely quickly, and it modifies everything I want, and it can even batch modify things that I want. I have been using Houdini to such a crazy degree that now I write Python in Houdini to generate the nodes, to generate what I want out of the nodes, and export it out into game engine. It feels like a cheat. in how powerful it is. But more importantly, it's fully transparent at every step. Houdini is amazing for displaying information on what I'm working with. There's literally a data grid that can show me any single type of data type I want and exactly everything that there is in it. When I'm looking at a vertex on a model, it can show me its position, what bones are bound to it, what are their weights, and what variable name is used to even store these bones. And I can ask that and change it in like a string edit or a value edit. And I don't even have to care about what I see in the viewport. And I can make scripts that look at these and change what is in there. It's so powerful. It also works like for an amateur. I can literally see what the bone names are, what is the hierarchy for them, and I can edit it, and I can eliminate out parts that I didn't want to have, and I can rename an entire rig if it has like a syntax that I don't like, and I can apply it to all the models I've ever worked on and re-export them in a single click.
Being able to reprogram tools is something that I cannot express how powerful that is as in anything. Like, I've tried so many note-taking apps in the world, and like I always talk about Obsidian, but it's the main reason I can't stress enough why I like Obsidian is because it is literally JavaScript, CSS, and text files. Anything I would ever want to do with that, I can do myself by either using the existing tools, write my own plugins, somebody else has written a plugin, or I can write a damn C# application that reads the directory and rewrites the files. And there's so much power in that it's like it dwarfs anything else. And there's so few tools that give you that. Like, honestly, I feel like Obsidian, Git, and now Vim to me are the three most all powerful things I've ever used in my life, where all three of those are fundamental paradigm shifts at a core level to how people should work, and they feel like they're in a different universe than every other application I've ever used in my life for what they do. Like, I love Eagle, but Eagle is just a terrestrial application, not these three god tier ridiculous things that like replace everything I do.
Just terrestrial. And to be fair, if we could modify Eagle, we would have done more.
It has an API, but it's not great.
Yeah, Houdini is definitely on that magical side too, though. I realize I was muted to talk. Like, it's definitely one of those tools that's like,
in regards to the question of if Houdini is like another Blender, yes, but actually no. So they do both make digital content creation easier. There are power tools for it. But Blender is about modifying what you have in front of you just the one time. And whatever changes you make, they are forever. You can control Z, but you can't control back some other change that you made 3 steps back, and you have to change 1 step in. Houdini works constructively such that you build modifications from the original thing all the way down to the end result, and you can insert steps in any way, any portion of the way. You can skip steps, you can cut down steps. It's amazing. You don't ever lose your work because all the steps that you've ever done are there right in front of you. And if something changes at the start, like you got a model and you need to polish it a bit for whatever purposes, but the artist made an issue with the model and he tells you that 2 months in, you can literally just open up the project, bring in the new model, click apply everything I did to it, and then it's working again. So there you go.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. And there was a call out from Midjourney too, which I think is another one of those tools that's freaking awesome and probably changing things a lot. So before we wrap, I just wanted to send everybody over to Jason Story's Ko-fi page, so you can go sign up, support Story, and get into his Discord server that has lots of interesting discussions. Do you want to say anything about that, Jason, or just tell him to go sign up?
There's a mod to my Discord right there, so you'll have lots of fun conversations. That's
yeah, it's definitely a very active, good Discord. I've actually been looking at your Discord layout and wanting to steal some of your channel ideas, because you have channels like, so things that I would talk about too, but I just watching them in your Discord and I'm like, oh, I'll just keep watching in stories. So yeah, I would recommend you sign up for it. Go check it out and get into there if you're not already. And then also, I think I put a link down in the description, but the asset store flash deals are still going on. There's 8 of them today. I thought there were 4 a day, but it seems like it varies a lot from day to day. Today there's 8. There's a ton of stuff going up on flash deals, and I think after each flash deal ends, they go to 50% off. So as soon as if you don't get it today, you still get it pretty damn close. So we're gonna call those out. Oh, and yeah, shout out to Code Monkey. I want to get him on here sometime. Yeah, see him in chat all the time. I would love to have him hop on and just chat live sometime. I think that would be a lot of fun. I gotta hit him up and send him an email.
If you haven't yet, go watch Code Monkey's videos. He has some really great talks about scriptable objects lately, and we had this all indirect back and forth, which was nice. He also has great videos showcasing new assets. I actually picked up 2 of the assets from his list, and he also has coupon codes on them. Also, you have coupon codes for the assets for sale, right?
Yeah, I think that's down in the description. It's just my name, BF22. It's probably the same for everybody. Their name BF22 is my guess. But yeah, it should be down in there with the link. Cool. Any last words or last things you guys wanted to share before we say goodbye?
Well, the Steam Awards selection nominations are up, but Terraria isn't eligible for anything this year because we're already one labor of love and there is no double winning. So thank you again for everybody who voted last year. I hope you have a fantastic time with all the sales going on.
I have to wait till next year to vote for Terraria again, right?
I just want to double down on the mentioning of Code Monkey's stuff specifically. Great channel anyway. Like I do enjoy the videos, but I want to highlight one thing in particular. Every so often a video comes up that's like it's worth bookmarking because you know you're going to be re-referencing it again to other people. And I just really wanted to highlight that the most recent video that was about, I think that's maybe not the most recent now, but the last one I saw was about the plan for a new game and going through the process of this is my estimations for how much I think it'll make. This is what my plan for what constitutes success. I think that video is the most coherent and clear, like visual demonstration of a lot of the stuff that we talk about here, where we complain about the fact that people approach the game thing wrong.
Which one of these was it?
That's a good question. Maybe it has been. I've seen the last one. There was one where he announced the game he's making.
This one?
Announcing my next day in game. That one there. Yeah.
Make
See,
sure
you have to watch it yourself. Yeah. Anyway, my point with that is just to say that we talk a lot about how if you want to make a game, the thing that is the flaw is that a lot of people don't really approach it with the logic of how much work is this going to be and what does success look like. What is the like marker for this is a successful finished thing? And that video, better than anything, I've actually sent it on to like 5 different people to highlight. If you can't answer to your own game the questions he's answering for himself in this video, then you shouldn't bother making a game because you will trip yourself up later. So just knowing the right question to ask and to approach it is like, I think that's the most succinct video for that it's made it into that list of like, there's maybe 50 videos that at some point in my life I reference regularly and that's now one of them. So I definitely recommend the channel for that.
It's a very good point. So I link that in the chat, and I'll put it into the description as well. Well, all right. I guess I just want to say thanks everybody for coming out. Please hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons. If you got comments, questions, just drop them down below, and we'll try to answer them in the next stream, which will probably be about a week from now. So, thanks again, everybody, and I'm gonna hit the button and say goodbye. See you next week.
Bye.